So actually, it's getting this down.
Welcome everybody to Design at Large for Spring 2025, to the Design and Politics in Transition series. My name is Manuel Schwarzberg Carrillo. I'm a professor in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning here at UC San Diego, and I'm a co-curator, co-teacher of the course today with Dr. Lili Irani. So we're going to do a very brief introduction and then cede the floor to our speaker for today, Danielle Dean. So this series that we have proposed for this quarter asks us to rethink design as a set of interfaces between critical practices and worlds. How can we refuse the limits of normative models of design, credentialed, state and corporate sponsored, and learn from forms of design that can generate new, just visions and coalitions? By rethinking design at a historical moment of radical and political social transformations, from mass deportations, genocides, and extinctions, we are seeking ways to redeploy design as a site for the production of counter-hegemonic modes of discourse and action. And we'll unpack all of these words later. Radical artistic disciplines, architectural practices, legal histories and theories, alternative food distribution systems, and other ways of figuring the world offer diverse avenues of inquiry for transforming and enriching our relations with each other and with the environment. In other words, this quarter, we will be considering a variety of design practices and their attendant epistemologies that together articulate transitions toward different, more equitable and free worlds. I'm going to pass it to Dr. Irani.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Lili Irani. I'm a professor in communication, and I also advise and teach sometimes in computer science. And so, and Manuel is from urban studies and planning. So we're coming together across disciplines to introduce a form of design that isn't just about the devices. It's not just about humans and computers interacting. It's not just about cognition. Like a lot of times, in design and systems thinking, when we talk about systems, we focus so much on like a body, a head, a machine, and maybe data structures. But this quarter is really about all these other dimensions of systems, like political systems, historical structures, large-scale infrastructures, and how those make different kinds of people possible, and what kinds of dreams and futures like all these different kinds of people want. So for some of you, this might be familiar. Maybe you're coming from urban studies or a humanities field. For some of you, this might be really different than what you're used to thinking about with design, but it's about the world that we share in common. And so I'm hoping that it'll generate interesting conversations. So my job now is to give you a little bit about the logistics of the class. So this class is basically a one-unit course. Many of you are undergraduates. Some of you are graduate students registered in different course numbers. Primarily, the course is about just coming, watching the lecture, and if you're, and asking questions of the people who are coming to speak. If you want to talk to the speakers, or you want to talk to me or Manuel about the ideas that are coming up, we also will probably be sticking around for like 20 minutes after class, but I think class officially ends at 5, so we know that some of you will have stuff that you need to go to at 5 p.m. There isn't a discussion session like outside of this. There's not a lab. We're not using Canvas for our conversations. That we're both really committed to what possibilities in-person interaction offer in terms of both not just talking about the transactional thing or the concept, but like encountering each other as humans. And also, Canvas is a very surveillable medium, and so I'm trying to de-Canvasify my education. So with that said, so we do value your in-person participation. We value your vibes. We value you coming up and talking to the speakers afterwards. If something happens and you have a reason where you really need to be remote, like a care obligation, disability, something where being here is not safe or accessible for you, then you can get a Zoom link from our TA, Gray Golding. So Gray, will you usually be sitting up here? Yeah, okay. So Gray is helping us with some of the logistics of the course. Their email address is on the syllabus and you can reach out to them. Also, if you have questions about the course logistics or units or registration or anything like that. There is no homework. We're just gonna be here to learn stuff. Does anyone have any questions about the course logistics before we actually get into why we're here, which is to hear from an amazing artist who came from design, Danielle Dean? Any questions? Okay, so one more thing I'll mention is so the course schedule, just one thing to notice is we don't have class on the first Wednesday of the month of each month. So don't come on the first Wednesdays. The design lab has another meeting that we all have to go to. So with that, I will hand it over to Manuel and we can all hear from who we came to see.
Was there a question that somebody had? Oh, yeah.
So there's a QR code that'll get passed around the class, and then you'll just fill out the Google form to track attendance. Thank you for that question. That's like the most important logistics. Thanks. Okay. Anything else? Perfect.
Okay, awesome. So we are, sadly, Dean Erdman, professor in visual arts, couldn't join us today, but we are equally fortunate to be joined by Professor Danielle Dean from the same Department of Visual Arts here at UC San Diego, just across the auditorium over there. I'm going to read a quick bio for Danielle. Working with archives, social practice, performance, video, drawing, and sculpture, Dean investigates the recursive loops between the circulation of ideas and the material reproduction of global capitalism. Operating across media and with a variety of collaborators and participants, she tries to find the fault lines within the seemingly closed circuit. Dean received her MFA from California Institute of the Arts and is an alumna of the Whitney Independent Study Program. She recently worked on a new commission for Mercer Union Toronto last year and for Spike Island in Bristol, the UK this year. Previously, she was commissioned by Performa 21 New York, in New York City, Amazon Proxy, and a solo show at the Tate Britain, London in 2022. Other solo shows have included Times Square Arts in New York City in 2023, Low Long Line, Bazaar at the ICA San Diego here in 2023 as well, True Red Ruin at the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit in 2018, and she also participated in the very prestigious Whitney Biennial in New York City in 2022. Other group exhibitions include This Land at the Contemporary Austin in 23, Freedom of Movement at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and the Center Cannot Hold, Lafayette Anticipation in Paris, and the Made in LA Biennial in 2014 at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles. So full disclosure, Danielle is my partner, so I know her work very well, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to you all. Please give her a very warm welcome.
Okay, just get waddled into the seat. Okay, thank you so much, Manuel, and thank you, Lily, for having me today. So yeah, I am an artist. I just wanted to give a quick background. I'm an artist from the visual art department. So I don't know if any of you ever have taken any classes over there, but it's a great department. But I did study art, but at some point during my career, I worked in advertising. So I did have how do you say, a moment of really focusing more on design. I was an art director in a big advertising firm in London, and that had a big influence on the work that I make still today. So we don't have tons of time, so I'm not going to talk about all of my work, but I'm going to just talk about a few different projects. And to start, the first project that I'll talk about actually does reflect on how I have been focused at times looking at archives of advertisements. This project became an obsession for me when I was living in Detroit a few years ago, and I came across, well, Detroit is really famous for Ford. Everyone knows Ford cars. So I actually started to look at an archive of Ford advertisements, and this slide that you can see behind you is an example of a Ford car ad from 1924. This archive was super fascinating to me because it actually was multiple representations of landscapes, which seems like, sure, that's obvious, but I actually thought about it as a kind of interesting relationship between this history of representing landscape in relation to a consumer product like a Ford car. Often the car is positioned in the front, like you can see here, using the technique of perspective. And I was thinking about how these types of strategies within these adverts would always position the human as the center of the landscape. So that was kind of maybe the discovery or the inquiry that I was looking at through these archives. And I wanted to find a way to think about that in an artwork. So the other thing about it was that a lot of early depictions of adverts in general, but in particular, I was quite surprised by this in Ford car ads, was that they were often painted. And this one is probably using gouache paint, which is a kind of thicker watercolor paint. So I was really thinking about how these depictions of adverts had a kind of relationship or an influence over our imaginary, and that there's something interesting about thinking about them as a kind of history of representation that starts with this relationship to drawing as opposed to beginning with photography. So these two drawings are examples of this advert that you just saw, but split into layers. So I was thinking about the ads also in relation to the assembly line. So everyone knows what the assembly line is, that the production of the cars was divided up into discrete tasks, and sometimes people would just do the same thing and they had no idea about the whole. So Walt Disney, he was really interested in Ford himself, which is a whole other topic that we won't go into in detail here, but he was also really fascinated by Fordism, Taylorism, and would, create Disney films based on this type of technique. And so I was also looking at this apparatus that was also made from car parts, which essentially would split the landscape up into layers so that the camera, I can show you this video. This is a example, a diagram of it. So it split the landscape into layers so that the camera could move in and out and make a parallax view. So make a kind of, I suppose, like an early digital three-dimensional space of landscape. So I decided to do something like this to the Ford advertisements because I was interested in this relationship. This camera, by the way, is called the multiplane camera. And I thought about it as a way of thinking through how this type of landscape, in effect, is kind of like an assembly line which ignores the complex ecologies that occur in nature and sort of splits them up into discrete parts as if they're not connected anymore. And I thought about this as like this relationship between the production of imagery and in our kind of like everyday, and the production of our imagination, right? And how this type of fiction has an effect on the real. These depictions put humans at the center of land, and when split like this can justify extracting from it, as if land could be pulled apart into discrete parts. So I'll show you a quick clip of this, but this is the installation view at the Whitney Museum in New York. So I'll just talk over it whilst it is happening. So basically, each landscape that you see, this animation is about 20 minutes long, and I'm certainly not going to show you all of it, but it's quite slow. You can see the pace is slow, and it just rolls slowly, almost a bit like a conveyor belt across these landscapes, which all come from the Ford car advertisements. And I literally in my studio, we redrew each part from the advert into layers and made this animation that just keeps going and going. Okay, so basically from that project, which really started my interest in some of the history of Ford, actually it was kind of like a dipping my toe into making more work in relation to this. And whilst I was in Detroit, I visited the archives in Dearborn, and that were, you know, basically sets of bureaucratic documents about Ford and the organization of the company. And whilst I was there, I came across the famous case study of Fordlandia, which some of you may have heard of, but basically, if you haven't, it was where Henry Ford wanted to take control of the kind of production of raw material, like the raw material of rubber for his car tires that he would have had to have bought in for production. He wanted to control that, so he went to Brazil and set up a rubber plantation where he, you know, essentially brought America to the middle of the Amazon forest and turned it into a sort of rational assembly line of growing rubber. And there, in this archive, there was loads of documents that showed essentially the failure of Fordlandia, because the story is that they failed so badly that they never even yielded enough rubber to make even one tire. It was a complete disaster. And so the archive was really fascinating. But what I found was that the archive, like many archives, there's often gaps, and the gap was that there was no accounts of how the experience of the workers, right, the people that actually work there. It was, everything was from the point of view of the managers. And so, for example, this document was actually a list of things that got damaged by the workers whilst they rioted, which they described as a riot, but we, you know, it would have been a protest. And they but the only evidence of that was the list of destruction that they caused. So I thought a lot about, well, how could I access the experience of the workers, you know, when some of them are not alive anymore, or I, you know, it was kind of like a difficult thing for me to get that information fully. So I also thought about it in a sort of speculative way. So I wondered how I could relate that archive to the present. So I was thinking through, like, well, what's a context of Fordism now, or what we call post-Fordism? So the assembly line that has essentially exploded across the globe in various ways. And at the time, rubber was a really big commodity. At the time of it was like 1930s, 1920s is when Fordlandia existed. Sorry. And now the equivalent of rubber could be argued as data. Data is really big business now. So I begun to make a connection between another form of the Amazon, but this time Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is a sort of subsidiary, I don't know, like a part of Amazon, the Amazon that we all know, the big retailer. And I was thinking about how Amazon was extracting a lot of data from humans on a kind of global scale, and a sort of, you know, post-Fordist context where workers have a hard time seeing each other because they spend, basically with Amazon Mechanical Turk, the work happens from your home, and it's a lot about gathering mass data from humans for many different reasons, through online click work. So basically things like questionnaires, image identification, and a lot of the data ends up being used for AI, for machine learning algorithms. It's not the only thing it was used for, but it often is used for that. So at the beginning of the project, I did connect with Amazon Mechanical Turk workers through the site itself. And this is Mohammed Wajid, and this is a quote from him. I work at home. During the daytime, I work in the living room, and during the evening and nights, I work laying on my bed. I just put my laptop beside me and sleep and wake up during nights just to check if there is any new work available. As of now, I don't mind sleeping on the same bed with my laptop beside me. For me, money is money, and it is very important rather than total comfort. So I then also realized that I didn't want to make this project in direct relationship to the Amazon Mechanical Turk site, as in I didn't want to use it to generate maybe more data. You could argue that if I made the art project directly from the site, it's just as extractive or the main problem for me was the lack of being able to have a continuous connection to the workers, because each time you put out what is called a hit, so a human intelligence task, it goes out to many people and you don't get to see who takes up the task, and you may never be able to connect to them again. And so from the point of view of an entrepreneur who's trying to get loads of data, that's amazing to them, because they're like, I don't need to worry about the human being that's behind this stuff I want. I just get what I want, and I don't have to be concerned about the welfare of this human. But I actually was mostly interested in connecting with humans. So Lily helped me. I went off of the site to a site called Turkopticon, which Lily actually is co-founded, and I managed to be able to connect with AMT workers and work with them. It was actually, I think, about over a year of ongoing connection during COVID. So it was still online, unfortunately, but we got to see each other in person, in Zoom, as in, and it was like a continue. And I'm still in contact with most of the people who was part of the project. And so this is Amy, and she lives in Portland, and we basically, after a while of like developing how to do this project together, which essentially basically became a sort of reenactment of some of the archival material or some of the events that happened in Amazon, as if it was like a speculative fiction, I suppose, like a sci-fi, as if everyone who was in this world was essentially working from home, but also a little bit like they were in this fictional forest, and they were engaging in being in a kind of sci-fi work world, which had a connection to the real, because everything that was spoken about was sort of talking about the work conditions that they experienced. So it was kind of a blending of reality and fiction. And the fiction came from the archive, so I suppose it's like historical reality, but I see it as fiction in some ways because there's no real way of being able to verify exactly what happened, especially from the archive material that, as I pointed out before, was from a particular point of view. So each Amazon Mechanical Turk worker was also sent a small camera kit so that they could also shoot their own footage. So there was like props, camera, lighting, and so everyone had to sort of learn how to shoot film, which was really fun because we learned together through Zoom. And so sometimes we did online shoots together so that there was support, and then other times they got to shoot their own footage without me being there. And so this is an example of the Zoom conversations that we were having. So in Fordlandia, time clocks were smashed during a riot. A whistleblower who had dirt on Ford was accused of being a diamond thief to discredit him. Workers were expected to work during the hottest part of the day. Ford insisted workers ate tinned peaches instead of the abundance of foods that the rainforest had to offer. The indigenous workers were forced to learn square dancing. Many irrational decisions were made by the managers as they sought to westernize the indigenous workforce. So in this image, you can see, and this is a more close up, this is an archival image of the Ford store, where basically everyone had to use their wages to buy back stuff from Ford. So they had to buy tin peaches to eat instead of being able to use the wages the way that they wanted. And so this is Hunter, and there was a moment of like setting up a store in his kitchen, and essentially all I sent him was the stickers of the peaches, and then we worked together to make the art direct, I suppose, this scene that he played in. So this is the install of this project. This was shown at the Tate Britain, and basically it was essentially a 5-channel video installation. So the screen in the background is a projection, and then there's 4 separate monitors that kind of acted as if each worker was sort of in their separate monitor, but it did switch at times. And then I painted, it was during COVID, so I had a lot of time. So I painted a lot of artificial plants. Yeah, and set them in silicone rubber, like servers. These are sculptures that were shown alongside of it. And then I'll just show you a clip of the video.
So I've been working in the Amazon for going on about 1.5 years. I started primarily because I lost my job. I was laid off, and I needed a way to support my family, but I had to stay home. I had to stay home with my kids.
I've been working on the Amazon for 6 years now, and it's been working out pretty well for me, actually. I was searching and searching, trying to find work, trying to find a job in the Amazon, and I found this job, and it's actually pretty cool because I get to choose my own hours, I get to choose my own tasks. So like, if there's ever something I don't want to do, I just don't do it.
It can be thankless, can be rewarding.
By bringing back square dancing as well as other primarily Anglo-Saxon dances, we believe we may counteract the unwholesome influence of jazz on America. People will leave the dance halls and cabarets in droves to swing their partners round and round at liquor-free square dance clubs. Jazz is the cause of America's moral decay. The road to repair is as simple as replacing it with fiddles and square dances.
This dance?
All join hands, circle left around the hall to that little old cabin in the lane. You're all going wrong, go back the other way to that little old cabin in the lane. Places all balanced all in everybody's swing to that little old cabin in the lane. To the left hand on your corner and your partner by the right, and your grand right and left half all around. First by your right hand and the next one by your left, to that little old cabin in the lane. When you meet your partner, you make your homeward flight to that little old cabin in the lane. Little old cabin in the lane.
Okay, so I won't talk super deep about this, but I also have a drawing practice, or this is actually watercolor. So because of looking at a lot of archives of advertisements, I and often redrawing them like the first animation that I showed. This series is based on also Ford ads, and it's a collage of many different adverts from different time periods. Some were watercolors in their original existence, others were digital or photographic, but I collapsed them all into this one large landscape painting. It's 4 by 7 feet wide, and it's meant to sort of, the idea was a bit like to do with this relationship between being at home working but the kind of contrast of the imagination of like being on an adventure and trying to find work, or the ideology of like having freedom, American dream and all of that stuff, and the contrast between those. And so these were a series of works. This one actually has archival material from Fordlandia, and when Fordlandia, the area in the Amazon, was burnt in order to grow rubber trees in assembly-like conditions, so in lines, which was part of the reason why the whole thing didn't work, because rubber trees don't like to be stuck together in lines. They like to be in diverse conditions, and so they got what is called tree blight, so little insects or diseases jumping from one plant to the other, and so that's why they constantly failed, which I think is hilarious, not for the trees but for Ford. So I'll just flick through these, and then the last one of this series that I did was a really, really long one. And so this is 35 feet and a half. It's called Horizon Grabber, which is the name of a Ford advert. They called the advert Horizon Grabber, which I thought was very apt for this. So it's sort of again, like an assembly line of these landscapes, and it goes from night to day, and it also can be like shown in different corners and things. Okay, so the last project that I will talk about is my project that I suppose I'm still in it, but it's basically finished. It's a piece called Hemel, which I'll just show this clip quickly and then I'll start talking about it.
Look.
Thinking back to when you were little, when you were growing up, there was nobody else quite like us two, really, especially around here. And you were probably the only black child at primary school. I was on my own. On the whole, it was fine. It was a bit difficult because your surname was still your dad's. And I soon realised that that wasn't going to work because they could never pronounce it. So I'd got that sorted and I got that changed to me again. And there were one or two incidents, like you were playing out round Mum's, because she just lived down the road, and there was some naughty boys that called you, and you came running in and told us, and your nan said something about take no notice, they're just not very nice boys, but I don't think it affected you really. You were very, very young. We never had any real problems. It was not a major thing where you felt like you didn't fit in. I don't know how you view it.
Yeah, I mean, I had a good upbringing. It's just difficult to talk about, but it sometimes wasn't amazing
Really?
to be here. Yeah, because at the time there wasn't that many people of color
Yeah,
here or black
yeah,
people, or it was
yeah.
very, very white, and
Yeah.
sometimes people would make me feel like I didn't belong. Hemel is a nice place, but it also has,
Small town mentality.
yeah, a little bit, yeah.
I don't suppose I even thought about those things.
Oh, don't be sad. I'm sorry. I didn't want to. Yeah, it's not. I had a good upbringing. You brought me up really well.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I think I have to.
Oh, God.
Sorry. Actually, I'm sorry. So, this is a clip from a work called Hemel. So, Hemel is a town in England. It's short for Hemel Hempstead. And it's the town that I grew up in. And basically, what I wanted to do was essentially, well, I'll explain. So basically, in this town, there, Hemel Hempstead, it's a new built town. That what that means was that in the 50s, it was built after the Second World War in England, and it was a way of creating more opportunity or more places for people to live outside of London that was blitzed during the war. And so, for example, my grandma moved from London to Hemel Hempstead, where she could pick her house from a catalogue. It was very utopian. And she was really happy that she could live in a house with a toilet. You can imagine that back then the houses in London didn't even have toilets. So there's that. And also at the time when Hemel was being built, so around 1957, there was a sci-fi film that was shot in the town called Quatermass 2. So probably none of you have ever heard of Quatermass, but in America it was called Enemy from the Space. It actually was released here too. And it was a sci-fi B movie that yeah, all of the scenes were shot in Hemel, and it was about the arrival of a non-human entity that possesses the minds of the residents and factory workers, who cultivate this goo that the workers have brought. They kind of collect them from the fields because they come into Hemel through meteorites, and then these meteorites turn into a large monster or alien entity that threatens to destroy Hemel and subsequently the whole world. So, like I said, the alien entity arrives out from outer space as meteorites and are collected by people, the workers, and taken to the local factories. So the thing that I don't know, I was really fascinated by this because you can see these clips, like actually the one of the shots is of a bunch of rows of houses, and in the background is the flat or the apartment that I grew up in. So it was very personal to me to see all these images of where I grew up. But the thing that I thought was beyond it being just about the personal was this way in which this sci-fi reflected on a type of hysteria or fear that's still present to this day in towns like Hemel and probably in America too. So this sort of fear of the other, fear of people coming into the town, because the town was essentially very utopian, but utopian for white people, right? It was built without the fact or not or knowing that England is a very diverse country, and it fundamentally is built on, the empire was built on diversity. But this this kind of doesn't, you know, become part of the collective consciousness. It's more about, well, this town used to be nice and now it's being now the design of it is lost its allure. So that's why in the clip that you saw was a lot of to let signs downtown. There's a lot of degradation in the town, and people blame immigration essentially on that. So I wanted to make a video that essentially takes on this fiction as a kind of blurring of fiction and reality. So it takes the fiction on as a possibility of truth, if that makes any sense. So I weave the fiction through this film that is shot on 16 millimeter. 16 millimeter was the way that Quatermass was originally shot. And as I play the protagonist, so I play the detective who is Dr. Quatermass, and I go back to Hemel and I investigate what's going on with these meteorites. But through doing that, I end up having conversations with workers in the town, because the factory workers, you know, ultimately in this time period were mainly Amazon workers because of that being a big employer. That changes throughout history, but at the moment, or the time that I was making it, in fact, because it's already changed because Amazon have already closed there. But, you know, it was one of the biggest employers. So I got to talk to some Amazon workers, and I allowed for the fiction to blur into the reality. So a lot of the workers, like Harvey, who you'll see in a minute, he couldn't talk about Amazon directly on camera because he would lose his job. So we used the fiction of the corporation. So in the Quatermass film, the factory where this mystical stuff is happening is called the corporation. So we use that as a kind of way of being able to actually talk about the reality. And then the other thing that happened was in Hemel, there was a absolutely massive factory explosion that happened in 2005, where a oil depot completely and utterly exploded in this. This is real news footage of the explosion, and all this black smoke came and covered the whole of Hemel. So it was a very apocalyptic moment, and no one actually died because it happened on a Sunday, but it did cause a lot of environmental destruction to the town. So I also weaved this into the story because it was a major, you know, thing that happened. And so the memory of people living in Hemel is this apocalyptic thing, which kind of suited the narrative of Quatermass. So also there's a lot of different archival material weaved in it, and ways of bringing in, like this is a slide viewer, and you see, you know, slides of Hemel through this.
What dreams a fountain can inspire, but then what dreams these clean and spacious surroundings have already answered.
moved here from Nigeria, right?
Yeah, I moved to the UK from Nigeria. But it's a very serious situation because you see the best doctors are leaving, the best nurses are leaving, the best professors. The people are running away, but simply because it's getting more difficult.
Kaimo, I did my GCSEs like last week.
Oh yeah, you passed, right?
Yeah, but like, I'm actually glad that it's over. Cause wait. Dad! Someone just sent you a text message.
I haven't worked for anybody all my life. I left school and I became an entrepreneur. I decided to do one of those jobs working with a corporation.
So you can see from that clip, or I'll just keep going, is that was Stan, and he was telling, you know, kind of the reality of what he had done and why he had come to England, and that he couldn't get work, so he ended up working for Amazon. But as I said, we substituted it for this corporation that was picking the meteorites from the field. But I think I have to stop, but I'll just get to the last clip. So you can just keep hearing that.
We had a dog, and I used to take him out early in the mornings for walks. I'd sometimes meet up with some other lady walking her dog. As we was walking around, we noticed there was quite a strong smell of fuel in the park and thought no more of it, really. And then roughly 2 weeks afterwards, the explosion happened. The force of the explosion was so huge, it come up and then just crashed down.
People living nearly 100 miles away from Hemel Hempstead reported hearing the blast. Dense, oily fireballs billowed into the night sky. There were suspicions this might have been some kind of attack, but police are almost certain this was a very serious industrial accident.
Okay, I'll stop now, and you can. Yeah, this is the installation view of the piece in Toronto. So you can ask me questions if you want. Thank you.
Do we have any questions?
I'm just curious, if is this available to watch info anywhere
It's
here?
not online, but
Okay.
if you, I can share it with you if you email.
I'm very interested.
Okay. We might get screened at some point on at UCSD. We're trying to figure that out. So, yeah.
One over here.
Hi, so I was curious since the explosion happened so long ago, how'd you make it look so good and get like such a good angle on it?
We actually reshot film, so it was it's very extreme, but it's news reports that we got from the BBC archive, and then we reshot it as 16 millimeter. Does that make sense? So what you do is you literally just show it on in good light, in a good condition, and project, or how do you say, just show it on a monitor or whatever, and then use 60 millimeter to re-record it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you for sharing your work with us. It's all so compelling. I'm wondering, kind of like a personal question, but you said that you're very influenced by your time working in advertising, and I'm wondering how you developed like a critical lens on that work, because I can imagine it's not an environment that's necessarily conducive to that.
No,
So
not
yeah,
at
I'm wondering like
all.
maybe you came in
That's
with
a
that.
great
or- yeah.
question. Well, wow, it's a really good question. So I studied fine art before at Central St. Martin's, so I already had a critical lens from there. But at the same time, as is my life, I always am like, I'm critical, but I need a job because I don't have any money. And at the time, oh, this is a long story, but personally, I had to move back to Hemel because I had no money. And I was like, what am I going to do? I can't be an artist. It seemed crazy at the time. This was back in 2006, and I just had no idea how I would be an artist. So I took a job as a receptionist in an advertising firm, and that was good because I could still do my work and on the side. But I started to date a guy on the creative floor, and I could see that it was something that I could do. And so I asked for an internship there. And I think I just was curious how it all worked. And I've always been really interested in how like advertising and TV and film seems so finished and polished and like a final product compared to the way art is, like, which can be that way, but I was just like, how do you get these things made? And so it was actually a great experience to be inside of the thing that maybe I ultimately was going to end up critiquing, because I already had an interest in how to make work in relation to the culture industry, because Central St. Martin's has a history of that. Like, do you know that art school in London? Yeah, it already was like about not just art for art's sake, but how do you look at design, look at films, look at all the stuff, the things that media, stuff that surround us and have such a power over us. Like, can you make art that engages in that, or somehow critiques it, or just makes it not normal in some way? So anyway, for a while, I really did just buy into it. I was like, oh my God, this is the best job ever. Like, my job was to draw ideas all day, every day, and I loved it. And then I was like, oh, this is awful. Like, after a while, I think a year in, I was like, this is so bad. All my creativity is going to sell Budweiser or Nokia phones. That was the clients we had. Budweiser, Nokia, nothing, all really, yeah, it was literally as if like the curtain was revealed, and I was like, this is absolute rubbish. And also because my mentor was always like, don't listen to the brief, don't do what, because you get the briefs would say target market, age, even race, all of this stuff, which I was like, oh my God. And so I would ignore it. But then in the end, they would find a way to tailor it back to it, you know? So anyway, I self-sabotaged myself, so I got laid off.
Any more questions?
We have time? Okay, my question is, so one of the things that's interesting about your art practice is that you involved like workers and like local people in
Mhm.
producing the art and kind of acting in the scenes. And so what's the process of collectively making knowledge to figure out what's going to be played out? Like with the Amazon
Yeah.
workers, were they reading about Forlandia or learning about it and then
Yeah.
making connections? Or how did that work?
Yeah, so that's why I do take a long time to make projects because, well, I mean, essentially, it's in workshops, but everyone's being paid to be at the workshop, so that means that people would be there. Like, I can't expect. I mean, you know, I feel like I can't even expect anyone to even want to read the stuff, you know what I mean? But it is part of it. And sometimes people are really interested, like Amy, and Hunter, who were part of the Amazon project. They were so into it and did do loads of reading outside of even what I brought to the workshops. So I suppose it's like, because it will be me saying, okay, this, like sharing a page from the archive and explaining what I think is going on, and then like talking through that in relation to their jobs now. So we had a lot of conversation with Elizabeth also, whose family were miners. So she was really interested in relating or talked a lot about how Amazon sometimes paid workers in Amazon vouchers, and that she had an experience of that. And then how that related to her family, who would be paid with company script and stuff. So it was just a bit like just having lots of conversations about the material. And then it would be up to me and as much as whoever wants to participate to then develop that into the work. And then sometimes it's scripted based on that, and other times it's not scripted at all. So Hemel wasn't at all, like some of it wasn't at all scripted. So it's a bit more like documentary. I'm just always super interested in, yeah, like blurring documentary and fiction, and yeah. Does that answer your question?
I think that's it. Maybe we have one minute. If somebody has one final question. No? Okay, well,
Oh, there's
oh,
one.
over here.
I'm wondering, what was the importance of including fictional elements in this sort of documentary?
Yeah, well, that's such a good question. I'm literally doing a grad course right now called Fact and Fiction, and we're talking about that very thing. Like, why is that interesting to do, or why is that important? And so for me, it's been a long journey of like reading post-colonial theory and different things that have like challenged me as what's my power structure in the situation I'm in, and how dare I just point a camera at someone and expect them to tell the world their life story. And even if I do that, how much how much reality do you actually get? Because to pinpoint the real is incredibly complicated, and actually, in my opinion, weaves in a lot of fiction anyway, or relationships to long-standing myths and fictions. So I feel, for me, it became a way of connecting creativity, play, imagination to quite heavy topics, and to also allow for maybe conversations of being free, like the participants to feel free to speak without it being completely on the spot for them, you know? So that's the reason. That's one of the reason. I do think it's an ongoing conversation, and I'm glad to talk more about it, but that's part of why I started to do it.
All right, I think we're out of time. Thank you again, Danielle.
No problem.
And we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday for Dr. Camille's talk.
You're so lucky. This class is great. You
Well,
don't have
we're
to do
so
any
lucky.
homework. I
So
mean,
we had a speaker who wasn't feeling well today, and so Danielle obviously talks about this work a lot all over the world, but we were so lucky and honored at your generosity to last minute, come and do this. And actually, I couldn't think of, it was actually a really perfect framing of like a transition from the Fordist economy and colonialism to the Amazon mechanical Turk extractivist economy. So it actually fit perfectly as an opening. So thank you.